Can you see that? Can everybody see?
Yes.
It? Oops, wait, I made it go away. There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
All right, I just gotta change one thing. All right, let's try this one more time. Okay. Can everybody else see that? Anyone?
Bueller?
Okay, we're getting notes in the chat. Cool. As long as you can see it, Vicki, we're good to go.
I can see it.
All right, go for it.
All right. Sorry, guys. I can't get my video to pop on for some bizarre reason. All right. Let's start with the seller packet. So as you may or may not know, excuse me, the first thing you need to do as an agent before you're representing someone, but you're in a conversation talking about techniques and monies and getting qualified and all this kind of stuff. You're having real conversations with a potential buyer. You need to get a consumer notice signed. The consumer notice is not a contract, and that is something you have to identify because there are those who are very reluctant in signing anything because they don't want to be made bound to anything. And so you want to show that this is not a contract. Point that out to them. But you have to then verbally say to them, the state mandates that I, a licensed real estate agent, have to go over this with you. The consumer notice identifies the 5 forms of representation anytime anyone enters a real estate transaction. And that's all this form is doing, is giving notification to, at that point, a customer. They're a client when they enter into a contract. So right now they're a customer. So they're a consumer notice. That if they should enter into a real estate transaction, they would fall into one of the 5 categories. So let's read this over. In an effort to enable consumers of real estate service to make informed decisions about the business relationship they may have with a real estate broker and salesperson, also known as a licensee, the Real Estate Licensee Registration Act requires that customers be provided with the notice at the initial visit. So when they may be giving you some pushback, you just want to review that first paragraph. That's all this is that they're being provided this notice. Licensees may enter into the following agency relationship with a customer. It could be the relationship is that of a seller agent. A seller agent, the licensee, and the licensee's company work exclusively for the seller landlord and must act in the seller landlord's best interest, including making a continuous and good faith effort to find a buyer or a tenant, except while the property is subject to an existing agreement. All confidential information relayed by the seller landlord must be kept confidential, except that a licensee must reveal known material defects about the property. That's very important. You, the licensee, are just as responsible as the seller if you know of a material defect that is not disclosed. A subagent has the same duty and obligations as the seller agent. And I'm quite sure none of you, and if there is one of you out there who does know, please speak up. Can somebody tell me what a subagent is? Subagent, anybody know? Hello? No? Okay. Subagency. Subagency was around 25 years ago. Sub-agency happened throughout the brokerages, and a licensee would give the impression that they were representing the buyer when all along they were representing the seller. And it became quite a conflict. There was no buyer agency. As buyer agency originated on the West Coast and moved towards the East, it was clear to see that the buyer needed somebody in their court. They thought they had this agent was representing them. They thought that this agent was protecting them. They thought that this agent had their back and was fighting for them. But the reality was, in agency, it didn't exist buyer agency. There was sub-agency. So you technically represented the seller, but you were helping that buyer out so that they could get to the goal line, which is getting their mortgage, getting their title, negotiating the home inspection, and all of that fun stuff. But really, that agent didn't represent them. So it felt to be a conflict of interest, and buyer agency came in, where clearly there is a line drawn in the sand. Who represents who? So that's what sub-agency is. It still exists. It is rarely practiced, especially in more developed areas in the state. And you may still find it in a teeny tiny little brokerage somewhere. So it does still exist, but not used. Next is buyer agency. As a buyer agent, the licensee and the licensee's company work exclusively for the buyer/tenant, even if paid by the landlord or the seller. The buyer agent must act in a buyer-tenant's best interest, including making a continuous and good faith effort to find a property for the buyer-tenant, except while the buyer is subject to an existing contract and must keep all confidential information other than known material defects about the property confidential. Dual agency. A dual agent. In a dual agency, the licensee works for both the seller landlord and the buyer tenant. A dual agent may not take any action that is adverse or detrimental to either party, but must disclose known material defects about the property. A licensee must have the written consent of both parties before acting as a dual agent. Designated agency. As a designated agent, the broker of the selected real estate company designates certain licensees within the company to act exclusively as a seller landlord agent, and other licensees within the company to act exclusively as a buyer-tenant agent in the transaction. Those exclusive words do not apply to Vicki Carey is only a seller or landlord agent, or Joe Brown is only a buyer-tenant agent. No, it means for the transaction, not that you've been designated one or the other with the brokerage. Because the broker supervises all the licensees, the broker automatically serves as a dual agent. Each of the designated licensees are required to act in the appropriate capacity explained previously. Additionally, the broker has the duty to take reasonable steps to ensure that confidential information is not disclosed within the company. So it's very important that we don't mix up the waters, muddy the waters. What belongs on one side of the transaction stays on that side. What information and knowledge on the other side of the transaction stays on that side of the transaction. Except for known material defects. Be very careful. If you're a listing agent and you have a seller who does not want to disclose that on a heavy rainstorm they get water, and blatantly tells you, I am not putting that in the seller's property disclosure statement, you are just as liable because you know of it. It's your job to pick up your folder, collect your pen, thank them very much, and walk away from that listing, because that will truly be litigation and you will be dragged in. Consumers and or buyers and sellers, however you fall in your capacity as the licensee, need to inform these people you are as responsible as they are for known material defects. Don't let them bully you around. In addition, a licensee may serve as a transactional licensee. Let me say this. Keller Williams Philadelphia does not practice transactional licensee. We do not do it. You cannot do this. A transactional licensee provides real estate services without having an agency relationship with the customer. Although the transactional licensee has no duty of loyalty or confidentiality, the transactional licensee is prohibited from disclosing that the seller will accept a price less than the asking or list price. The buyer will pay a price greater than the price submitted in the written offer. The seller or buyer will agree to financing terms other than those offered. Like licensees in agency relationships, transactional licensee must disclose known material defects to the property. Transactional licensee is a licensee in the state of Pennsylvania who is representing no one. All they're doing is shuffling paper. Now, with that said, it is customary and often that form of representation may be used when family sells to family. They just need somebody who knows how to handle the paperwork. Keller Williams Philadelphia, along with other large brokerages, do not find that warm and fuzzy because you are truly not representing, and they find it as a higher risk for litigation. Hence why we don't do that. So you need to pick a side if you find yourself in one of those situations. It goes on the second page, dealing with reasonable professional skills. Our duty is to deal honestly and in good faith, present all offers, counter offers, notices as soon as practical, comply with the real estate seller law disclosures, disclose as soon as possible any conflict of interest. It goes on to say what the duties are of the licensee and what is negotiable. The duration of the licensee employment, which would be on your buyer agency contract, right, is negotiable. The licensee's fees or commissions, the scope of the licensee's activities or practices, the broker's cooperation with the sharing of fees with other brokers. All of those issues, those bullet points there, will be found and answered in the contracts. So since we're talking about the seller, it'll all be in our listing contract. So this is an acknowledgement that the consumer knows of their rights. That's all this is, okay? Now we move on to licensing contract. Seller agency, exclusive right to sell real estate. That is the only form we use for our listings. Exclusive right to sell real estate. Starting at the top, like I've said this over and over for those of you who have taken my classes, these lines are here for a reason. These lines are here to be filled out. Realtors have got to stop being lazy. If you have taken my agreement of sale class, you'll note it is not mandatory, but these contracts show better, easier to read if done in capital letters. Many years ago, it was the standard that all of these forms to be done in capital letters. I'm going to suggest you continue using that concept So with that said, on the top left, it starts with broker, Keller Williams, Philadelphia. Our address, for those of you who don't know where we're at, 1619 Walnut Street, 5th floor, Philadelphia, PA 19103. Our company phone number, 215-627-3500. Our fax number. Fax numbers are important. Some of you don't even know what a fax machine is, let alone put your eyes on one. But they exist, and they're used often in the financial industry, especially if you're going to deal with a bank-owned property or a short sale. A lot of times they do their verifying of information through fax, not email. Our fax number, take this down and fill it in, 215-627-6525. 215-627-6525. You turn to the right side of that form, and that's where you're going to put your name. Now, if you're on a team, your team leader has to go on that named line also. Okay, so whoever your team leader is and your name go on the line. Very few of you have a direct phone number, a phone on your desk at the office that has a completely separate phone number. If you are someone who has that, that's where that line is for that phone number. Otherwise, you're going to put in your cell number, fax number. Maybe you have an e-fax. Great, put that in. If not, you're going to use the company fax again, 215-627-6525. That goes directly to the front desk email, and then whomever is responsible for that will forward any faxes to your email. And then they're asking for your email address, who the seller or sellers are. Whoever is on the deed, their name has to go on this, and their signature is needed for the for the listing contract to be valid. And what is the mailing address for the seller? It may or may not be the property you're listing. This may be an investment property. It may or may not be local. It could be an executor or an executrix. And we need mailing addresses. They are extremely important. And you're like, why? Why are they so important? Well, they're so important because about 4 years ago, an agent from Keller Williams, at the time, Center City, passed away, a young gentleman, and was not real good in record keeping. We couldn't get access to his email, to his cell phone, and tracking information and clients down were extremely difficult. We had no mailing addresses. So it is important that the mailing addresses of clients, of your customers, be put in there. We need a phone number, maybe a fax number if they have it, and their email. It is vital that this information be filled in. If you get run over by a reindeer, we have to figure out as a brokerage how to reach these people. Okay? Stop being lazy. Seller understands that this listing contract is between the broker and the seller. Does the seller have a listing contract for this property with another broker? Question mark. Well, we want to hope for no. But if that should be answered yes, you need to call somebody. Like you probably need to call me and say, I got a situation here. How do I handle this? Okay? Because we can't have somebody enter into two contracts. Now you'll note that the listing price is next. When you're filling this out, you may want to skip that for now until you are quite sure that you have discussed with the seller what pricing you're going to put in there. So if you're filling this out ahead of time, just leave that blank. You're going to put the address, the zip code, the city, borough, or township. So if we're dealing with a Philadelphia property, it is the city of Philadelphia, the county of Philadelphia, the school district of Philadelphia. If you are accidentally listing something in the burbs, the borough or the township information is found in the public records, and it will guide you if it's a borough or township. It'll say that. And that's the information you need to put in there. And please make sure you get the school district correct. What is the property zoned as? And that will indicate in the public records. Present use is a code kind of thing. And identification. Tax ID number is generally how everyone does it here in the immediate area. Lot and block type of description is something you'd frequently find in New Jersey, though. But clearly it's on here and it must exist somewhere. Remember, these forms are for the entire state of Pennsylvania. Okay? We move on to paragraph 2, starting and ending date of the listing contract, also known as the terms. No association of realtor has set or recommended the terms of this contract. Broker/licensee and seller have discussed and agreed upon the terms of the contract. All contracts have to have a beginning and ending date. So it states here in 2B, starting date, this contract starts when signed by the broker and the seller unless otherwise stated here. And then you would have a date that it became active. Generally speaking, that's not done in advance. Ending date, the contract ends at 11:59 on blank. 6 months is a very common time frame for contracts. So I would aim to get a 6-month listing. This is to the discretion of both you and the seller. If the seller is giving you a lot of static about that and a hard time, you can reduce it to nothing less than 3 or 4 months. It's just not done. So kind of stand your ground there that you want a 6-month listing. Now, it also could be a year listing, and we're going to talk about that. By law, the term of a listing contract may not exceed 1 year. If the ending date written in this contract creates a term that is longer than 1 year, the ending date is automatically 364 days from the start date of the contract. Dual agency. And what they're doing now on paragraph 3 and 4 are reiterating the description of a dual agency and a designated agency, what they are. But you've already talked to your seller about that because you did the consumer notice first. So it's another reiteration of those two forms of agency. We practice, look at 4, there's a teeny tiny box, and it says designated agent is not applicable. We as a company, Keller Williams Philadelphia, practice designated agency. So you will never check that box off. That is how we do our business as a brokerage. Broker's fee. No association of realtor has set or recommended the broker's fee. Broker and seller have negotiated the fee that the seller will pay broker. Broker's fee is X of the sale price. All right. So between 5 and 6% is customarily found in the area. That number you put in there, again, is between you and the seller. It goes on to say, or, and then there's a $ with a blank. Keller Williams Philadelphia has set precedents that if a property is listed under $75,000, we are looking for $4,200 to $4,400 commission. That, though, is negotiable. I would not suggest offering a commission less than $3,500, which of course is being split between the two offices, the listing office and the buyer agency office. Because sellers need to realize on lower end cost property, they're cutting their nose to spite their face if they're offering dramatically less commission. What incentive is it for that buyer agent to show the property? So if we take our calculator and we go and do the math here, so let's say $75,000, 75,000 times 6% has given us $4,500. But what if we had a property that was 75,000 and you were offering 3,000 you were collecting, which means 1,500 to a co-op? Or sometimes you'll see as low as $1,000 is being offered to a co-op. What incentive would that co-op have to showing their investor your property when the guy down the street's going to give me $2,000? You have to explain this to your sellers who are very money conscious, and I understand that, but you have to show them that money moves everything here. So if you're trying to save $1,000 or $2,000, this property could sit way longer than ever desired to. Okay, so it's a percentage commission, and or if the property is 75,000 or less, it's going to be a flat fee commission. So whichever of those two options is greater is how the commission is going to be paid out. And $blank. Oh, well, what's that for? That's the fee that an agent can charge a seller for the conveyancing fee, for hiring the conveyancer to do all your busy paperwork. That number ranges anywhere on an average from $250 to $500. Oftentimes, it's pretty much in the middle, 3 to 4, 350, etc. The one thing I will say, pick a number, regardless of the purchase price, regardless of the sales price of the property, pick a number that you consistently charge your customers, or your clients, I should say. So if 350 is that number, you consistently on all of your transactions charge $350. That will be on top of the percentage that the seller and agent had agreed upon. Now, if you look at 5B1, there's a $sign. Of the broker's fee is earned and due, non-refundable at signing the listing contract payable to the broker. Never, ever do I want to see a number in there. That is filled in with a 0. We are not charging as a brokerage our sellers a fee that is non-refundable just because they filled out the paperwork and gave us the listing. No, no, no. That needs to be a 0. Joe, can you move me to the next page, please? Seller will pay the balance, broker's fee, if property or any ownership interest in it is sold or exchanged during the term of the contract by the broker, broker's licensee, seller. Even if the seller finds the buyer, we as a brokerage receive a commission, or by any other person or broker, at the list price or any price acceptable to the seller, or a ready, willing, and able buyer is found during the term of the contract by broker or by anyone, including the seller. A willing buyer is one who will pay the list price or more for the property, or one who has submitted an offer acceptable to a seller, or negotiations that are pending at the ending date of the contract resulting in a sale will get paid. A seller signs an agreement of sale, then refuses to sell the property. Maybe you might call it seller's remorse. Or if the seller is unable to sell the property because of failing to do all things required of the seller in the agreement of sale, such as a seller's default, or the property or any part of it is taken by the government or public use known as eminent domain, in which case seller will pay from any monies paid by the government, or the sale occurs after the ending date of the contract. The sale occurs within blank days of the ending contract. If a buyer had gone through the property while it was active and then comes back after the listing expires and goes under contract with that seller, if you can prove that A, that buyer went through the property during your listing term and went back afterwards so that they convinced the seller, listen, take my offer because now you don't have to pay a realtor, you are entitled to a commission. The buyer has shown or negotiated to buy the property during the term of the contract, and the property is not listed under exclusive right to sell contract with another broker at the time of the sale. If the sale occurs, balance of the broker's fee will be paid upon delivery of the deed and other evidence of transfer of title or interest. If the property is transferred by an installment contract, balance of the broker's fee will be paid upon the execution of the installment of the contract. This paragraph's part 2 here on the top of this page are giving you a bunch of scenarios how a listing agent might get paid other than the traditional agency that we're familiar with coming to the terms of the contract. These are other scenarios that might play out. Paragraph 6, broker's fee if settlement does not occur. If an agreement of sale is signed and settlement does not occur, the deposit monies are released to the seller, and the deposit monies are released to the seller. Seller will pay broker blank of the deposit monies. If this should go to litigation and the seller is awarded the deposit monies because the buyer defaulted, generally that blank, 50% is filled in there. If the seller is awarded the deposit monies that were held in escrow, 50% of that deposit monies goes to the brokerage. 50% would then go to the seller. That's customary, the number that is put in that blank. Cooperating with another brokers. Licensees have explained broker company policies about cooperating with other brokers. Brokers and the sellers agree that the broker will pay the licensee from another brokerage a fee for a broker who procures the buyer, is a member of the multiple listing system, and who, A, represents the seller as a subagent. There, I want you to put a 0. We're not dealing with subagency. B, represents the buyer as a buyer agent. Well, we do that all the time. It's very customary here. Broker will pay blank percent from the sale price. Now remember, on the previous page, the decision was made between the seller and the licensee what percentage of commission for the compensation is going to be paid to the brokerage. Let's pretend on the previous page that was 6%. Now the question here is 7B, what are you going to pay the co-op, the buyer agent who brings you a ready, willing, and able buyer? It is customary that the commission is split equally between the brokerages. Now, with that said, if you choose not to split it equally, you have to describe that and explain that to the seller, because you're reducing the interest in that property because you're offering a reduction in the commission. Real estate in Philadelphia is a very small circle. And when this concept of not splitting equally rears its head is when both sides get to see the ALTA and or the HUD for a cash transaction. And when it is shown that the listing agent is receiving a greater commission than that of the brokerage who represented the buyer, an uneven split there, it causes some real hard feelings. So we all want to play nice in the sandbox. It's a small community, and you're going to run into that agent again with another transaction. And they will do their best to make your life miserable during that whole transaction because you, in their mind, stole money from them. So be very cautious when you make a decision not to split the commission equally. Consider not playing fair. All right. Does not represent either the seller or the buyer. Well, C is talking about a transactional licensee. Okay, so we just talked about that. Keller Williams Philadelphia does not practice transactional licensee. Oh, that is correct. But you'll pay a transactional licensee a fee, which is customary 1% of the purchase price. So the answer is yes, we'll pay 1% to a transactional licensee. They have no representation, but your seller does because you're representing them. Now, if that commission was agreed upon at 6% and you're paying a transactional licensee 1%, that means that you're walking away with 5%. Not such a bad gig. All right, paragraph 8. Duty of broker and seller. Broker is acting as the seller's agent, as described in the consumer notice. See, so clearly you always have to do your consumer notice first to market the property and negotiate with potential buyers. Broker will use reasonable efforts to find a buyer for the property. Seller will cooperate with broker and assist in the sale of the property as asked by broker. All showings, negotiations, and discussions about the sale of the property, written or oral, will be communicated by broker on seller's behalf. All written or oral inquiries that seller receive or learns about regarding the property, regardless of the source, will be referred to the broker. If the property or any part of it is rented, seller will give any leases to broker before signing the contract. That's really important, guys. If you are dealing with a property that has a tenant in it, you must obtain the lease to review. If any leases are oral, which is legal in Pennsylvania up to 3 years as a term, seller will provide a written summary of the terms, including amounts of rent, ending date, and tenant's responsibilities. Seller will not enter into or renew or modify any leases or enter into any option to sell during the term of this contract without broker's written consent. Broker service to a buyer. Broker may provide services to a buyer for which the broker may accept a fee. Such services may include, but not limited to, document preparations, ordering certifications required for closing, financial services, title transfer and preparational services, ordering insurance, construction, repair, or inspection services. If there's a buyer who's quite fabulous and has made a business decision to enter into a contract without representation, they watched a late night show at 2:30 in the morning, how to buy real estate without representation. They're quite fabulous. They know how to do this, but then realize they don't know what they're doing. At that time, you can offer services to that buyer, such as here's a mortgage company, here's a title company, and anything else they may need, a home inspector, without divulging, without crossing the line of your representation of a seller. Broker's not responsible for damages. Seller agrees that broker and broker's licensees are not responsible for any damage to the property or any loss of theft or personal goods from the property, unless such damage, loss, or theft is solely and directly caused by the broker or the broker's licensees. Deposit monies. Broker, if any, in the agreement of sale will keep all deposit monies paid by or for the buyer in an escrow account until the sale is completed, the agreement of sale is terminated, or the terms of a prior written agreement between the buyer and seller have been met. The escrow account will be held as required by real estate licensing laws and regulations. Buyer and seller may name a non-licensee as an escrow holder, in which case the escrow holder will be bound by the terms of the escrow agreement, if any, not by the Real Estate Licensing and Registration Act. Seller agrees that the person keeping the deposit monies may wait to deposit any uncashed checks that is received as deposit monies until the seller has accepted the offer. Regardless of the apparency of entitlement to deposit monies, Pennsylvania law does not allow any broker holding deposit monies to determine who is entitled to the deposit monies when settlement does not occur. Broker can only release the deposit monies if an agreement of sale is terminated prior to settlement and there is no dispute over the entitlement of deposit monies. A written agreement signed by both parties is evident that there is no dispute regarding deposit monies. Or if after broker has received deposit monies, broker receives a written agreement that is signed by both the buyer and the seller, directing the broker how to distribute some or all of the deposit monies, according to the terms of a final court order or according to the terms of a prior written agreement between buyer and seller that directs the broker how to distribute the deposit monies if there is a dispute between the parties that has not been resolved. Seller agrees that if seller names broker or broker's licensee in litigation regarding deposit monies, the attorney's fees and costs of the brokers and licensees will be paid by the seller. Other properties. Seller agreed that broker may list other properties for sale and that broker may show and sell other properties to prospective buyers. This listing is not going to be your only listing. Paragraph 12 is letting the seller know you have additional sellers and you may have additional buyers that you're working with. So they are not your sole client. Additional offers. Unless prohibited by the seller, if broker is asked by the buyer or any licensee about the existence of other offers on the property, broker will reveal the existence of other offers and whether they are obtained by the licensee identified in the contract or by another licensee working with the broker, or by a licensee working for a different brokerage. So if you were asked in a multiple offer situation, are any of these offers yours, Vicki? Because I'm the listing agent. Are you a dual agent in any of them? I have to answer the question. You can't skirt it. It says right here, you got to answer it. Once the seller enters into an agreement of sale, broker is not required to present other offers. Seller will reveal defects and environmental hazards. It is important that the seller does, I'm going to move this along a little bit here. The seller does reveal deficiencies and any defects to the property. There are laws in the state of Pennsylvania for seller disclosure laws. If the property was built before 1978, you have to disclose any lead that is known about, and you have to make sure everybody gets the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home. Home warranties. Home warranties can be offered before or at the time of settlement. Right there at the table, you can open up a home warranty account for the buyer who can be paid by any party. Recording of the property. This property will be recorded. Seller understands the potential buyer viewing the property may engage into photography, videography on the property. Seller shall remove any items of personal nature. Seller does not wish to have photographed or recorded. So encourage your sellers to remove personal items, perhaps photographs of young children, things of value, firearms, God forbid, have that removed, jewelry, cash, anything like that. You want to get it out of the house. And remember that things can be recorded with those nifty little devices like Alexa. Be very careful what is said in the house. You just never know what's being recorded. Joe, can you move me on, please? Recovery fund. There is a recovery fund in Harrisburg if an agent has been proven to have committed fraud, misrepresentation, or deceit in a real estate transaction. This recovery fund allows a potential buyer to get deposit monies back. We cannot discriminate. Notice of personal offerings. For all of these reasons, race, color, religion, religious creed, sex, disabilities, either physical or mental, familial status, it goes on and on. Transferring of this contract. Paragraph 20 talks about if the brokerage changes hands or changes names and becomes a new business, everything remains the same in the contract, just the name changes. This contract stands alone. It's not entered with any other type of contract. Conflict of interest, if the parties within the contract have a financial or personal interest with the contract, it has to be disclosed. This contract, it's in its entirety. We're not picking and choosing and crossing out any verbal or written agreements that were made before or not a part of the contract. Anytime we change this contract, it has to be done in writing with signature of both buyer and seller. It talks here how we're going to promote the property. And if you go all the way down to D, 25D, multiple listing service, broker will use the multiple listing service. You want to check that off. Publication of the sale is public knowledge and will be disclosed in a newspaper, website, or other media. Talks about copyrights, fixtures, and personal property. This is really important. It is pre-printed in here, as it is pre-printed in the agreement of sale. Included in the sale are existing items permanently installed to the property, free of liens, and other items including, and it goes on and on and on. If you walk in a home and there is something quite unique in the home, a very ornate chandelier, you need to ask the questions. Mr. Seller, what are you taking from this home with you to your next home? Is this particular chandelier staying? Are these sconces staying? is that pot rack staying? I'm telling you, this becomes huge issues. Ask your seller, are you taking anything in this house that I see right now? Highly recommend that it is removed prior to the property going on the market and replaced with a tasteful replacement. What is excluded? If there's something that is not removable, for instance, there is a hot tub on the back patio that the seller is taking with them. Make sure that that is added, excluding the hot tub on the rear patio, and that is identified in bright. Tax and special assessments. This information you're going to get from the tax records, right? What are the taxes for that year? What is the assessed value? Is this particular property in a tax abatement? Is this a condo or homeowner association? If so, get the name of the condominium, their phone number. Is there a special assessment currently going on? Is there a capital contribution that is due from the buyer when this property changes hands? You need to have all this filled out. What is the condo fee? How is it paid? Quarterly, monthly, yearly. Title, seller will give possession of property to the buyer at settlement. B, when they're talking about here rights of ownership, such as oil, gas, and mineral rights, that would have to deal with properties up in the Pocono areas, right? We're not dealing with any oil or mineral rights in the city, but again, this form is for the entire state, so it may apply to areas in the Poconos. Does the seller have a mortgage? If so, you need to fill out this information. You say to the seller, go get me the statement that you get every month from your bank, Wells Fargo, Chase, whoever, and fill in what the approximate balance is, the address of the mortgage company, their customer service number, and the account number. Is there a second mortgage, an equity line of credit? That's really important you ask. Do you have an equity line of credit? That too has to be paid off at time of closing. Even if the equity line of credit line is zero, it has to be closed out at closing. Okay? Joe, can you move me on, please? Does the seller have any judgments, past due taxes, federal liens, etc.? You need to ask these questions. Now, you want to hope that they tell you honestly. They may or may not, but you need to ask them. How and what type of financing is the seller willing to accept? Cash, conventional, FHA, VA? FHA, VA do have some restraints on them regarding safety issues that if they are found to be not up to the quality of the FHA, HUD, Federal Housing Association, or the VA, will require them to be upgraded, often at the seller's cost. So if the property is shaky in condition, peeling, chipping paint, 3 steps or more without railings, it leans to the left, the back bedroom ceiling shows stains from a roof leak, all kinds of issues, this is probably not an FHA home or a VA home. So you would want to list it cash or conventional. 33, special clauses. Now you may add some of these issues. If this is attached with a vacant land contract, or is this property a short sale? If you know it's a short sale, you're going to need to add a short sale addendum. The seller needs to initial off they received a consumer notice, they have received the seller's property disclosure statement, and that they have received the lead-based paint disclosure and have filled these out. This is really important stuff to have. The seller's property disclosure statement and the lead-based paint form have to be submitted to a buyer prior to them entering into an agreement of sale. Okay. All right, let's move on. Let's go to, there's a rental contract. So this form would be used if you are listing a property for a rental. You're going to represent a landlord, right? There's a lot of similarities to this form, an awful lot, as there is to the standard listing contract. So you will fill it out accordingly, but I'm not going to go through all that because there's a lot of similarities that are fairly self-explanatory. Now let's go to the seller's property disclosure statement. Regardless, page 1 is really important. There are 10 ways, 10 reasons when a seller's property disclosure statement does not need to be filled out. Only 10. It doesn't say here, oh, owned as an investment property, investor never walked through the property, don't have to fill it out. Nope, that's not one of them. Listen, you guys, when you represent a buyer and you get a seller's property disclosure statement, it is your duty as the agent representing the buyer to review that form in its entirety. You'll note that the seller's property disclosure statement, each line is numbered, just like the agreement of sale. Take a pencil, circle the line that is not completed, have it sent back to the listing agent to have it filled out in its entirety. It is really important that your buyer is signing at the end of this something that they have read in its entirety. If you let a buyer sign an incomplete seller's property disclosure statement, that buyer is acknowledging that they're accepting whatever is on this form, filled in or not. That doesn't feel warm and fuzzy in a court of law. When the judge says to Vicki, Vicki, why did you do that? You represent the buyer. Your loyalty, your confidentiality, your concerns are that of the buyer. Yet you let that buyer sign an incomplete seller's property disclosure statement? Yeah, that's not so good, right? Okay, so it's very important you go over this with your sellers and you confirm that every line is answered accordingly or how it needs to be, okay? We go on to the next one, which is your residential lead-based paint hazard disclosure form. Joe, if you could whiz by that, please. Excuse me. Thank you. This form has to be filled out and it runs in tandem with the seller's property disclosure. You give both of these forms to the buyer agent if they are interested in putting an offer in. So the seller has to answer the question. Seller has no knowledge, or the seller does have knowledge. Seller has no reports or recordings, or seller has provided the buyer with available information about lead-based paint. Seller's estimate of closing costs. In the agreement of sale, on the last page, when we get the sellers to sign off, the question is, did the seller get an estimate of closing costs? And you need to fill this out to the best of your ability. The broker's fee, 5%, 6%, whatever that number is. There is no cost for preparation of deed. Transfer tax. Now, the transfer tax varies between the city of Philadelphia and the suburbs. In the city of Philadelphia, for each side, it's 2.14%. In Bucks, Montgomery, Delaware counties, Chester counties, it would be 1%. So it's over double in the city of Philadelphia. 1% of what? or 2.14% of what? Of the purchase price. Seller assist, well, you're not going to know if there's going to be seller's assist because this is the estimate of closing before we entered into an offer. So you're going to have that zero. If you have discussed with your seller and you've decided a home warranty is a good marketing tool, how much is that home warranty going to cost that seller? And you're going to advertise it in the MLS. Municipal certifications, that's our U&O, use and occupancy in the city certifications. In the suburbs, it varies in cost. In the city, it's just over $100, maybe $112 or $115. But if you're in a municipality, it's probably going to be more, and you might want to put $150 to $200 range. The resale condominium certificate, the Resale Act, varies anywhere from $200 to $500. No settlement fee, notary fees run $65 to $75. No survey, no lot sewage system pumping, unless you have a property that has that in the burbs and the seller is having it pumped. You can add that on to give them an idea of cost. Property repairs. Every property has bumps and bruises. I don't care what it is. Everybody's got them. You may or may not put a numerical number in there to get that bottom line as close to accurate as possible at time of closing. It can vary from $1,000 to $3,000 to $5,000. It's sort of optional and it really depends on the condition of the property. Tax certification, no. Overnight, figure $35, the charge from $35 to $50 for a title company to express mail out the payment for the mortgage. Domestic and Patriot Act search. On an average, it's $10 for every individual that is searched. So if it's a couple, it'll be $20 for domestic, $20 for the Patriot Act. You total them up, you get a number. Don't get involved with this adjustment. That's all for the title company when you get to closing, so don't worry about that. Take the estimate of closing costs to the third line down where it has total estimate, put it in there, put in the purchase price. Now you're going to subtract the estimate from the purchase price to give you an idea of the proceeds that the seller is going to walk with. And then you need a general idea what the outstanding mortgage or equity lines may be. And then you'll subtract that line from the estimate of proceed line, giving you an estimate of net proceed to the seller. This is a PAR form. It is really simple to use. It's not complex. So that's why I particularly like this form and recommend you use this form for listings to give an estimate of closing cost. Excuse me. On the next page, we talk about the affiliate business disclosure and domestic relations, and it breaks down some general information here. Notice of public relations in 1997, Governor Ridge passed into law for domestic relations to see if someone is court ordered to pay child support and they are in the rear. That's what that search is for. TRID disclosure talks about the obtaining of mortgage financing. Business relationship, how Keller Williams agents have a business relationship with Annie Mac, Go Abstract, Finance of America, Cinch Home Services, which is our home warranty company. That does change on occasion. We just need to let the seller know that we have these other companies that we are associated with. As a seller, they may only be part of the home warranty one. A seller is not getting a mortgage. A seller is not using the title company. So none of that, applies to them. But the the home warranty company might. So they just need to initial on the bottom there. On the next page, it talks about additional terms, and one is service to the seller. Now, that is the same service to the seller you filled out on the agreement of sale. Excuse me, on the listing contract. When you and the seller agreed on the commission price, then the next blank was a service fee for your conveyancing. That is this paragraph again. Services to the seller. It's a reiteration of a cost. And if we pretended you put $350 on the listing contract, that's the same number then that goes here. Payable at settlement is the services to the seller. And what are some of these services to the seller going to be? Ordering the use and occupancy in Philadelphia. They're going to initial that. Title review. They're going to initial that. Scheduling of settlement. Doing that. Ordering tax, water, sewer, trash. Ordering condo association docs. Now, of course, they're only going to initial that line if the property is a condominium and or a homeowner association. Title company and others will prepare a HUD or an ALTA and ordering mortgage payoff. Again, you want them to put the mortgage company they're affiliated with, their address, phone number, and account number so that the conveyancer can notify those companies to get payoffs. We need a full signature on that. This is all the stuff that is in compliance so that when you turn in your information with your multi-use form after the property settles, you are meeting your compliance needs. These are all these forms have to be in here. Next form, please. We have a lockbox or super authorization agreement. If you're putting a lockbox on a property, you need to have this form filled out. Okay? It is possible for a lockbox to be cut off the handle. Someone can jimmy open it and now have the key. You need permission to put a lockbox on there because if something horrible like that should go awry, now we have a seller said, I never agreed to a lockbox and they robbed my house. That's not so warm and fuzzy in a court of law, but see here you have authorization to have a lockbox. So you want to use that, okay? It's always the what if, how do we protect ourselves? The next form you're going to see is a vacant property disclaimer form. Now, this form primarily is designed not for your standard vacant home, but primarily this is when you have a property that is dangerous in conditions, especially those properties. I mean, you could fill it out if you're dealing with a vacant property. Go ahead, fill it out. But it is designed for a property that is hazardous, has no electricity. The back wall is not on it. You have it boarded up with plywood at the front door, and you have to have a screwdriver to get in. Those type of homes that are hazardous to others, it's sort of a hold harmless that we try to have a disclaimer for, so everyone knows that this could be a potentially dangerous property. That is the purpose for this form. So if you are going to list a property that has hazards in it, the floor has holes in it, the walls are missing, the ceiling has collapsed, whatever it may be, we highly recommend you have this form filled out. And the last one is a seasonal addendum. Primarily, the importance of this is to be used in cold weather, but it also pertains to hot weather. When it's extremely humid, it could cause mold growth in the property. So it's just another little, oh, by the way, Mr. Homeowner, I need you to know that we have to come to some sort of understanding of climate control in the property. You don't want pipes freezing, nor do you want heat and moisture creating an element or a host for mold to grow. All right, that takes care of our listing packet. We're now going to move on to our buyer packet.
I have to find that and share it. Give me a second.
Okie dokie. Our buyer packet, I'm just going to keep talking while Joe's looking. The buyer packet starts with the consumer notice, just as they're all the same as we did on the beginning of the seller packet. So the consumer notice is exactly the same, and it needs to be filled out and understood by your buyer. You're going to explain it the exact same way. So on the next page, we're going to talk about buyer tenancy and agency contract. All right. This form is really important. This form has some equality to that of a listing contract. Here's my question. Would you put all the time and energy that you put into something in listing a home without a contract? Would you list a home, pay for the photographer, do the write-up, get it in bright, do open houses? Would you do all that without a listing contract? No? Oh my God, I got somebody who says no. Does anybody say yes? Listen, there are 5 of you out there. I got 1 response. Who wants to wake up out there? Give me an answer. Are we doing all the listing work? Definitely not. Oh no, you people are awake out there. Okay. Well then, let me ask you this question. Why? Why are you doing all the work you do without a buyer agency contract? And there's only one answer to that. And the answer is the agent does not know how to explain this contract and to have the buyer understand the need for this contract. See, the need for this contract is when you take these buyers out and you do not have a buyer agency contract signed, who do you represent? Ooh, no one. Who else has an answer? You're out with buyers and you do not have a buyer agency contract signed. This agent represents who? I want you to think back at the beginning of this class. What did I speak about? A form of representation that is hardly ever used. I talked about it when we talked about the consumer notice. I asked if anybody knew of it, and of course, nobody answered. So now you tell me, sub-agency, exactly. You are a sub-agent, and as a sub-agent, you're representing the seller. You need to share this with these buyers. They need to understand the importance of having representation. See, representation can never be assumed. And if you don't have this contract signed, it is an assumption to the buyer that you are representing them. Is this making sense? Now, you'll note that there is a time frame on this. You may have buyers who are running scared because they had a bad experience with a previous agent. And you haven't proven yourself to them of your quality, of yourself, your professionalism, your expertise, your knowledge. Then you're going to fill out a contract for 1 day, a 1-day representation. And you may want to put on the top of the contract that this contract is involving these addresses only. Excuse me. And you're going to put the addresses of the properties you showed that day. This has a 1-day expiration on it. So if they ever became interested in this property, you are the procuring cause for that property, and you represented them on that day only. It is really important. This is why this doesn't get filled out, because people don't understand it. You have to read it. It has a broker's fee, just like we did when we listed properties with our listing. What kind of fee are you willing to accept in paragraph 2B1? With seller's representation by a real estate brokerage, and that's generally how we do our business, the property is listed in the MLS, the fee of blank percent or a purchase price of blank. So that's a flat fee commission. You need to fill that out. Are you willing to accept something less than 2.5%? Well, you have to make that decision. And if you're not willing to accept, you would put in that line, you're willing to accept 2.5 to 3% of the purchase price. I will tell you that does fit in dot loop. And or you're willing to receive nothing less than $1,500. Let's pretend. You have to come up with that number. And you'll see on the next line, whichever is greater and blank with a dollar sign. Oh, that's that same blank number for your conveyancing fee. So if you're charging $350 on the sell side, you're going to charge $350 on a buy side. It's very important to be consistent with that number. Then it says, paragraph 2B1B, with a seller who is not represented by a real estate broker. Who could that possibly be? Who is that seller that is not represented by a real estate broker? Who is that person? Looking for an answer. You 13 people out there, tell me. A FSBO, for sale by owner. Wonderful. That's exactly right. So if your buyer calls you up and said, Vic, oh my God, a for sale by owner sign just went up 3 doors down from my Aunt Lucy, and Aunt Lucy's going to watch the baby when I go back to work. Can you find out about that? You need to make sure you school your buyers. Never, never, never are they to knock on a door of a for sale by owner. Their job is to notify you, and then your job is to go out there and reach out to the for sale by owner with, and write this down, with a form found in PAR known as a broker's fee agreement. The broker fee agreement says, my buyers, Jack and Jill Brown, are interested in looking at your property. If they move forward with an offer, you will pay Keller Williams Philadelphia X amount of a commission. That's why you have to get out there before the buyer gets out there. See, you need to school your buyers. Don't touch that doorknob. Don't ring that bell. You call me. I go and take care of that. Because it then says, with a seller that is not represented by a real estate broker, the fee is blank. Let's pretend they go knock on that door. They ring that bell without calling you. And now that FSBO says, listen, I'm not paying anything. That's why I'm a FSBO. You need to have filled in here how much you want that buyer now to pay your commission. And that's what line B1B is in paragraph 2. That is now the responsibility of the buyer to pay your commission, because the seller is not paying a commission. Okay? Again, paragraph 2B4 is a 0. Joe, you want to flip to the next page, please? Again, it talks about dual agency and designated agency. We already went over that, right? We already went over that with the buyer with our consumer notice. Broker's service to others. It states here that you can help other buyers and provide services to not only buyers, but to sellers. What if this is a FSBO transaction and you get it signed off? Now, the FSBO, who thought they were quite fabulous because they watched an infomercial at 2:30 in the morning, when you say to them, I need a mortgage payoff, I need a use and occupancy, I need, and they go, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. You say, it's okay. You could go to Go Abstract, and for a fee, they will take care of this for you. So you can intervene, help them, not represent them, but you can help them, right? Again, it talks about the contract is in its entirety. It talks about that this contract is not transferable. It talks about confidentiality and the experience of the real estate agent in Pennsylvania. Deposit monies, again, it talks about that's going to be held with the office to whom represents the seller, if any. If this is a FSBO situation, that the broker for the buyer, which is on the agreement of sale, will hold the escrow. Huh? Did you drink your insurance?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Talks about our civil rights. Talks again about discrimination. Megan's Law. Talks about whom you would refer questions about Megan's Law to. Pennsylvania State Police website and or the local municipality or police department. It talks about inspections, and notice in bold letters, unless buyer and seller agree otherwise, real estate is sold how? How is real estate sold? As is, in its present condition. That verbiage is also in the agreement of sale. You need to remind your buyers of that. This property will be, and it talks about recordings of the property. There are pieces of equipment out there, such as Alexa and other devices that may record, and it's giving you a heads up, keep your mouth shut when you're in properties, because we never know what's being recorded or filmed. This too will be recorded in City Hall or whatever the municipality is. Excuse me. Joe, if you'll flip the page, please. It talks about the recovery fund, again, for a reimbursement if a licensee has been found to have committed fraud, misrepresentation, or deceit in a real estate transaction. We need your buyer's signature and the signature of the agent representing them.
Oh.
What? Next, we're going to talk about the agreement of sale, which we know is quite long, quite complex, and I've chosen not to get involved because it takes multiple classes to go through this. But please, I can ask you to read it over. It would be helpful. Excuse me. We now buzz right through that. And we're going to go to our next form, which is notice to the buyers and sellers regarding designated agency and disclosed dual agency. This is an additional form that Keller Williams Philadelphia has compiled to give you another layer of protection, identifying especially a dual agent situation, to remind and inform again the parties in the transaction, buyer and seller, that the agent is working as a dual agent. They are walking the line, representing both sides. Very important. You have as much coverage as you can possibly have for litigation. If a discrepancy should come up and charges are filed against an agent in regards to dual agency, that they favored one side over the other. Next form is the buyer's financial information form. This form has been around a while, and it is not a mandatory form. Let me say that. But with that said, the majority of brokers who represent the seller and brokers agents are mandating that they have that form. And they're mandating that they have that form for a very particular reason. It says here, buyer affirms that the above information is true and correct. Buyer understands that the information may be used as a basis for the acceptance or rejection of an offer by the seller. This form is often used when a buyer has defaulted, especially to a loan officer, and we find this out 20 days into the process. So as a listing agent, it is important that you get this and you review this form and keep it in your file. It talks about what the buyer's plan is with this property. Are they going to occupy it as a primary residence? And then it has other questions that have to be answered yes and no. Assets. Now listen, when you have a buyer filling this out for assets, God bless, they're multimillionaires. The world does not need to know that they're multimillionaires. What you need to disclose here is the availability of the assets to purchase this property. Enough money for your down, enough money for your closing costs, enough money if you're paying cash. You just have to identify the monies needed to purchase this property. Not that you own 7 multiplex units or have $5 million in the bank. None of that is needed. Just the amount needed to move forward with the transaction. What are your liabilities? Liabilities are long-term debts. So the question is, what is a long-term debt? Child support, alimony, IRS, student loans, credit cards, car payments, personal loans. These are considered long-term debts. Even though the buyer is going to have a pre-approval, that doesn't alter the necessity of having a buyer's financial information form filled out. It's really important. Once in a while, you're going to get a buyer who's going to balk at that because they're like, I have a pre-approval. If the seller requests it and will not entertain your offer without it, what have you accomplished here? The other purpose of this is to make sure the buyer has the necessary liquid cash to move forward. Oddly enough, I have received buyer financial information forms that indicate the buyer doesn't have enough cash to move forward in the transaction when I get the estimate of closing cost from the buyer's agent. So we're going to talk about that. You always, as a buyer's agent, need to turn in with your packet the estimate of closing cost for the buyer in this transaction, which do not create that form from Bright. Get that form from the loan officer. It's going to be a much more accurate form. Okay, so make sure this is filled in. Liabilities. Do they own a property? They might. Maybe it's an investment property. Maybe they're going to sell this one. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe. Their employee information, their base salary. It's just a general overview, but it is actually quite important to the seller. So make sure you have your buyers fill this form out. We move on. to the next page. The next page is mold discovery and waiver. You've been through the property. You know if it smells a little musty. You know that there may be an issue. Maybe you saw mold. Maybe you didn't see mold. Regardless, I strongly recommend you have this form filled out. So if the need be that you have to get a mold spore testing done, you already have it filled out that they want to do this. Okay. Next, we have the affiliate business disclosure. This is the same affiliate business disclosure form that we spoke about, excuse me, in the seller's packet. It talks about domestic relations. It talks about TRID. It talks about our business disclosure. And the buyer's just going to initial on the bottom that we are affiliated with Go Abstract, Annie Mac, Finance of America. The buyer has an option to use some of these, all of these, none of these, but we just have to disclose that we are in a business relationship with them. Next page, please. On the next page, you're going to see, again, services. Oh, excuse me, that should say buyer and it says seller. So unfortunately, that's just a typo there. But the form is going to indicate we have a buyer form. And that's going to indicate if they're going to use Go Abstract, Annie Mac, Finance of America, or etc. Also, you'll see services to the buyer would be that 350 number that we talked about before. That 350, if that's the number you used on your buyer agency contract for your conveyancing. The numbers always have to be the same, always have to be consistent on every form, okay? And that would say buyer signature on the bottom. The next is your deposit money form. You need to have this filled out and signed and sent over with your offer. We also have a Philadelphia smoke detector, next page, and carbon monoxide form that I recommend you use also and have the seller signed off that the adequate smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors be present in the home at time of closing. Some forms that are optional might be an escalation clause form that is very popular right now in our seller's market. That's what we're in. We're in a seller's market. Inventory is low, therefore there is a demand for product. The escalation clause you should read over and understand, but essentially when you look at paragraph 2, it is saying that the purchase price of buyer's offer is to increase so that the net purchase price to the seller is blank higher than the net purchase price of a competing offer. Oftentimes, the number 500 or 1,000 may be put in there. And then it says higher than the net proceeds of the competing offer up to a maximum purchase price of Y. So this is saying that your buyer is willing to go $1,000 over, let's pretend, the next highest offer, but not to exceed blank. If the property is on the market for $350,000, the buyer says, I'm willing to go up to $355,000. But I'm willing to bounce up my offer that is at $350,000 by $1,000 to the next competing offer. If the next competing offer is $352,000, your buyer is willing to go to $353,000 because it is under the margin that has been set at $355,000. Okay, so this kind of gives you guys a general idea, but I highly recommend you read this over so you understand the other paragraphs within it. On the next page, we're going to talk about an appraisal contingency. Now, an appraisal contingency can be a very important addendum to add to your agreement, but it's not always as desirable use when you're in a multi-offer situation. It's one more contingency attached to it. I will say this to you, in representing a buyer in a very competitive offer, you may choose not to use the appraisal contingency, but in paragraph 8 of the agreement of sale, the loan to value ratio percentage is a safety net for your buyer, that they would not be purchasing something greater than the appraised value, and you have not chosen to use an appraisal contingency addendum. That part of paragraph 8 is priceless. You must always be accurate with your loan to value ratio. And if you don't know it, you have to call the loan officer and get that number. Never, never, never leave that area blank. That is a detriment to your buyer. This appraisal contingency form is pretty self-explanatory, and generally you would check off the purchase price. You want this property to appraise for the purchase price. Cooperating broker compensation form is the next one. And you want to make sure you fill this out and send it over. Now, I've said this before, when you are representing a buyer, you need to kill a trade. You need to print out the agent's version of the Bright MLS, indicating what the compensation is to the co-op, the buyer agent. Because if you showed this property and the co-op at the time was 3%, and 20 days later you write an offer and it was reduced to 2.5%, you are entitled to the 3% when you showed it. But here's the problem. You can't go back to see that in Bright it was 3% at the time you showed the property. You have to have it in writing as your proof that you want 3%, not 2.5%, because they changed it. The proof has to be that at the time you showed the property, that is the compensation you are entitled to. And until you lose that 5.5%, you will be diligent in making sure you have filled out the cooperating broker compensation agreement and have saved all of the papers of the properties you have shown in Bright. You just never know when you need to retrieve that to get that 0.5%. Last is the paperwork known as Protect Your Family from Lead and Mold Moisture in Your Home. These forms are mandated and have to be given to the client, buyer agent, right? On our next slide, here are two forms that you're going to use eventually as you move along in the transaction. The buyer's reply to home inspection. This is, for a better choice of words, a wish list. This is a wish list, if needed, from the buyer to the seller regarding the home inspection, wood infestation, water, radon, deed, sewage, etc. Different parts of the inspection due diligence. And if you are asking for a written corrective proposal or a monetary adjustment. Now, it's important that you see the very bottom of this form. This form is only signed by the buyer. This is the, hey, Mr. Seller, this is what we're asking for. This is the wish list signed by the buyer to the seller. Once you guys being the buyer agent and the buyer, the seller and the seller's agent, have negotiated the terms of that wish list as your buyer's reply to inspection, you then you've banged it all out and come to an agreement. You then put all that agreement in the change of term addendum form. Is it going to be a monetary adjustment? Is the seller going to make particular repairs? Is the seller going to make particular repairs and pay for the cost from a vendor that the buyer chose? So these are other options, right? So at that time, if you turn the page, Joe, you'll see this is a two-part form. And now we have both signatures of buyer and seller. So this is a multi-use kind of form, but it is the form that is needed once everyone has made a business decision how they're going to respond and move forward in regards to the reply to home inspection. The next form you see here is the broker fee agreement. That was the form I spoke of earlier. When you're dealing with a for sale by owner, you have educated your buyer. These buyers don't know anything. Your job is to inform them. Your job is to educate them. And in your initial contact with your buyer, you need to teach them. You need to teach them about never, ever knocking on the door or ringing a bell of a for sale by owner. You need to teach them that you can't be in their back pocket 24 hours a day, and that there is going to be an open house with balloons that they can't resist, and they're going to walk in without you. You need to teach them that they are to sign in, but they're only to sign in your name, not their name, your name, the brokerage, and your phone number. That prevents the agent from sitting the open house any way to reach out to your buyer. These buyers don't know this. They weren't born with this knowledge. You have to teach them this knowledge, okay? So this is that broker fee agreement that you need to read over, that if you are asked to knock on the door of a FSBO, this is your protection to get paid. You go to the door with this form. Okay? Because, oh, by the way, we don't want the FSBO holding our buyer's money, right? And it talks about that. We as the buyer brokerage are going to hold the buyer's money, even though, yeah, but it's customary that the sell side do that. Yeah, it's customary that the sell side does that when it's being listed by a brokerage, not Joe Bag of Donuts on Snyder Avenue, right? Things to think about. And the last document you'll see here is receipt of document. Joe, if you could flip that page, please. Do I have receipt of document? No, don't have the receipt of document form. One more. Yes, there we go. Receipt of document. This form is used when you're dealing with a 3407 or a 5407. What is a 3407 or a 5407? Hello? One of you fabulous people out there, give me an answer. Silence. It's golden. A 3407 and a 5407 are the Condominium Act and the Homeowners Plan Community Act. When you get that paperwork, your buyer has to sign that they received the documents. There is a specific allotted time in the agreement of sale that the buyer has to review the condo docs and or the homeowner association docs. How do we know when the clock starts ticking? We don't know when the clock starts ticking unless we have documentation. Having your buyer sign and date allows us to know when that clock starts ticking for the review period of these documents. This form is needed whenever you're dealing with a condo or a homeowner association. That is the conclusion of today's class. I certainly hope it has been helpful and in enabling you guys to get all the right paperwork that is needed. All right, guys, have a good day. Talk to you later.
Hi, Vic.
Bye.